Okay, so first thing that I just want to kind of note here is that we're continuing with Candide for next time, right? So you're going to read up to chapter 22 for next time. I'm not giving the page numbers here because I think some of us might be using slightly different editions. But yeah, you're going to want to read, whatever edition you have, you're going to want to read up to chapter 22. And once again, you are going to want to come to class prepared with a quote for free writing. Now, we're going to do these free writes slightly differently from what we've been doing, right? Up to now, it's just kind of been for you. You haven't turned them in. As of today, we are going to start, pardon me, something stuck in my throat. We are going to start turning them in. And not so much for a grade, but because what I'm hoping we'll do here, right, I'm hoping that you will kind of identify a particular strand or binary that you're going to stick with as we continue doing these and continue to develop your idea. And then by the time we're done looking at Voltaire and Rousseau, then you'll have some ideas together for that first paper. So I'm not going to grade these, but I'm going to give you feedback and things to think about, right? So do either of you have any questions about this? Yeah, Colby.
So, by quote, do you mean like it has to be like a quote or like somewhere within the text?
Yeah, just a quote, just a direct quote from the text, right? Because we're going to be picking apart the language as well as the themes and the plot points, right? Part of what we're doing here is paying close attention to language. So I do want to see at the top of the page the quote you're working with, so that, well, one, I can easily find it, and two, to see what you're actually doing with the language in the quote and how you're connecting it to particular themes. Other questions? Okay, then I've listed the basic process I want you to follow here on the board, right? So you give me your quote at the top of the page, along with the page number so I can find it. You're going to first try to identify the strand or binary you think your quote is a part of, right? What's the bigger thing you think this quote is connected to? Then I want you to analyze the specific language of the quote, right? How is it treating this strand or binary? What are the connotations of some of the key words here? Is there any linguistic ambiguity, symbolism, figures of speech, that kind of thing, right? And then finally, I want you to try to consider how this quote and the strand or binary it's part of point to some larger theme or idea that you see emerging in the text, right? So think of this as kind of like thesis-seeking writing, right? So we're writing in order to look for the beginnings of an argument. So you will have 12 minutes starting from now. And then at the end of class, remember you're going to turn these in. 2 minutes. Time. So finish your sentence and okay, so I want to start this by talking about what you all chose to write about, and then I want to try to give you some context, historical, cultural, and philosophical, to help you through the rest of this. And then we'll start maybe digging into the text a little bit more. Okay, so what did y'all write about?
Like the quote we chose?
Yeah.
So I would. Did you want to go over her? Okay. I don't know. I know I took someone's line.
You've already started talking, okay. So just go ahead.
So I chose a quote from chapter 12, page 29.
Okay.
And the quote is, 100 times I was upon the point of killing myself, but still I love the ridiculous foible is perhaps one of our most fatal characteristics. For is there anything more absurd down to wish and carry continually a burden which one can always throw down, to detest existence and yet to cling to one existence, and breathe to caress this serpent which devours us till he has eaten our very heart.
Okay, so what made you settle on that one, and what did you write about it?
I guess it was like sort of more of like, I guess I just kind of chose it because like me myself, I'm kind of crazy like that too. So it kind of stood out to me the most.
Okay.
So, and then I was like, maybe it has like more of a deeper meaning to it. I think there's something not only just like the morbid meaning of someone saying like, oh, they want to, kill themselves, but there's always a reason to why someone wants to take their own life. So that's why I chose that quote, because I kind of wanted to dive a little bit more deeper into the quote.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what conclusions did you come to about it?
So I came to put, from my free write or just from
from the free write, yeah.
Okay, so I said that it could mean numerous of things, rather it be like they went through a certain event that made them want to partake in killing themselves, or I said that I think that it was kind of, okay, it's not cliche, but it, kind of the way it's written is cliche. So like I thought it was very cliche. That was one thing I found. It was kind of cliche, and I think that the character has a perception on life that the reason why they didn't take their life, that they have different perceptions of what life could bring them, and it's more valuable to them.
Yeah, and let's consider this quote and who's speaking it and where it happens in the novella, right? So who says this? who's actually talking here? Because that matters.
I know. I remember I was reading like it was something about a lady that was saying this. Like I forgot who it was. That was
Yeah, this is the old woman who is coming on as servant, right? After she has told the story of her life experiences, right? And is she saying here that she wants to kill herself? Or is she saying that despite all of the horrible shit that has happened to her, she still doesn't want to kill herself, right? She clings to existence even when it's awful.
I think another thing that I took from the quote too was that like it could I believe that she was raped or she was her like kind of like misunderstood as a servant or like she was kind of mostly what I took from it was like she was raped. Basically.
And you know and violently abused in various ways and has had this
mistreated.
And this fall in status from being the daughter of a pope and a princess to being a lowly servant woman, right? Who now like at this point she's old and bent and wrinkled and she isn't even beautiful anymore, and she's had one of her ass cheeks cut off, right? And nonetheless, right, she's fleeing for her life yet again, but none of that makes her want to end her life, right? So I think that we are kind of hitting on a general theme here, but kind of like an attitude towards life and our preference certainly for maintaining our lives and our existence even when our lives are terrible. And I think we'll kind of maybe tease some more out of this as we talk, right? But yeah, okay, so it's an interesting place to start. So Colby, what about you? Where do you want to take us?
Mine's not quite as profound.
Okay.
But it's not page 14 for y'all, I don't think, but it's the first page of chapter 2.
Okay.
Mankind, we're born to assist one another. I sort of wrote how like there's a binary theme throughout here that people will say, we're meant to help each other, we're meant to boost each other.
Yeah.
And then we'll immediately stab your back. In this case, a page later when they start flogging him.
Yeah. Well, not only that, right? I mean, like, who are these two guys? What are they trying to do? Why are they so nice to him?
They're recruiters.
Yeah, they're recruiters for the Bulgarian king's army, right? And clearly, the laws are written so heavily in their favor that all they have to do is get him to drink a toast to the king of Bulgaria, and suddenly they can sign him up, right? And and this is the first of 2 times that we see in this first third of the novella, right, that Candide gets publicly flogged. The second time is in Portugal when he's captured by the Inquisition and tortured by them, right? Here, the idea that people were born to help each other. These guys aren't helping him, right? Or at the very least, their concept of helping has more to do with these kind of nationalist undertones than anything to do with Candide's own welfare, right? So we're dealing with people who are basically two-faced and snakes, right? And once again, we're seeing a character who just repeatedly has horrible shit happen to him, right? Like from the end of chapter 1 onward, it seems like each of Candide's adventures just gets him deeper in the shit, right? And every time a little glimmer of hope is dangled in front of him, right? What tends to happen to it? Yeah. Although one thing that you should get used to as when you're reading this, characters don't stay dead in this novella. Every time somebody dies, they're gonna pop back up again later. and there'll be some kind of improbable explanation as to why they survived, right? And I think that actually kind of plays into the theme that Ariel was discussing about people just, clinging to life by any means necessary, right? Even when life is unpleasant. So, was there anything that y'all found particularly confusing or difficult about this? Like, do y'all have questions about it?
It's a pretty easy read. It's a little bit better than things I've read in the past, like assignments that we've done before. It's not the easiest, but it's definitely not that bad of a read.
Okay, I mean, it's narrative, right? There's
Yeah.
a story, right? Okay. But is there anything that you would like, anything like cleared up right away, or anything you are finding difficult or confusing, either of you?
Like, I guess this is more of a culture question.
Uh-huh.
Why exactly was he punished for just going on a walk? I mean, I know he was in the military and all that.
Yeah. Well, and I think like we've got these two episodes juxtaposed against each other, right? Where he's whipped by the army for asserting that he has the freedom to go on a walk, right? Basically, do you know what AWOL means? Like absent without leave. Basically, that's what happens here, right? The army now he signs up for the army, whether he wants to or not, right? And then they get to control his comings and goings. And he insists that they can't, right? So if we look at this is the page 2, the end of chapter 2, right? He resolved one fine day in spring to go for a walk, marching straight before him, believing that it was a privilege of the human as well as of the animal species to make use of their legs as they pleased. So what does this suggest he believes about human life and human nature? What does he believe we have?
Free will.
Yeah, that we have free will. I should be able to take a walk if I want to, right? So it's a very simple expression.
And not being punished.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very simple expression of free will, right? He had advanced 2 leagues when he was overtaken by 4 others, heroes of 6 feet, who bound him and carried him to a dungeon. He was asked which he would like the best, to be whipped 36 times through all the regiment, or to receive at once 12 balls of lead in his brain. He vainly said that human will is free and that he chose neither one nor the other. He was forced to make a choice. He determined, in virtue of that gift that God called liberty, to run the gauntlet 36 times. So again, he chooses the punishment that doesn't lead to death, right? He chooses to stay alive rather than, to just kind of end it all right there, right? So what is this telling us about the philosophical doctrine of free will as it plays out in the real world?
He definitely used liberty in his stance,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He does, right?
Mm-hmm.
But does he actually have the liberty that he says he does or thinks he should? No, because circumstances constrain him, right? And that's one of the basic arguments that Voltaire is making throughout the whole novella, right? Is that philosophical reasoning, when it's based primarily on theory, doesn't take into account people's actual life circumstances. So you're going to see this word pop up a lot. They're going to talk about reasoning a priori. A priori is a Latin phrase that means from the former or from the preceding. Do either of you know what this phrase means? Totally okay if you don't. I don't expect that you do necessarily.
Isn't a phone someone who is kind of a fool, right? No, I don't know. I'm trying to connect it. I don't know. I've heard that word.
Voltaire definitely connects this phrase a priori to foolishness.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody who reasons a priori is making deductions from theory, right? So a priori reasoning in philosophy is reasoning from theory, or based on theory, rather than practice. And while we're at it, let me just quickly define a couple of other basic terms, and then maybe give you a little bit of philosophical background here, right? So you're going to see this phrase "sufficient reason" a lot as well. So, a lot of philosophers in this period were very much interested in cause and effect. Right? A lot of philosophical reasoning was very closely related to scientific thought and scientific reasoning. And so sufficient reason is based on the principle that every observable effect must have a cause. Right? You can't have an effect without a cause, so that cause that created that observable effect is the sufficient reason for that cause, right? Now, we're going to see, as we look at this, a lot of cause and effect reasoning applied kind of backwards and in really nonsensical ways. And that is all intentional, because Voltaire thinks a lot of this reasoning is ridiculous. There are also references here to universal reason. So that's different from sufficient reason. So when you see the phrase universal reason, it's a reference to the belief that reason is the ultimate first cause of everything in the cosmos, right? That everything that exists for some purpose. That human minds are formed by reason, in a way that allows us to understand the world. And that reason is the principle that underpins human existence and our interaction with the world. So our ability to work things out logically, our ability to connect causes and effects, is essentially like the great underpinning fact of human life, and the thing that these philosophers believe makes us different from other animals. Although a lot of recent philosophical and scientific work suggests that maybe we're not as different from other animals as thinkers in the 18th century thought we were, right? But this is all happening in the context of an intellectual movement that historians call the Enlightenment. So is this phrase familiar to you? Like, have y'all talked about the Enlightenment in history classes? Or okay, so what do you already know about it?
Sort of happened between the first and second Great Awakenings.
Okay.
That's the main thing that I remember it as, because it was like people got close to God, and they got intellectual, and then they got close to God.
Because of the kind of pendulum swing back and forth, right? Yeah, okay. Anything else that y'all recall about this?
I was thinking more of like a religious, like another religion that recurs to the Enlightenment, but never mind.
Yeah, it's not. In fact, yeah, the Enlightenment really is kind of a movement more kind of away from traditional religion for reasons we'll talk about in a second. Yeah, but we're talking about a movement that occurs primarily in the 17th and 18th centuries, mostly in Western and Central Europe. So France, Britain, Germany, Austria, right? These are the kind of the key centers of this. It's helped along by two other kind of related historical trends, right? One being the Protestant Reformation, in the 15th century, and the invention of the printing press. So do y'all know what I'm talking about when I talk about the Protestant Reformation? Okay, Colby, what's the Protestant Reformation? Tell me a little bit about it.
It's when started with Martin Luther in his 1995.
Yep, 95 Theses.
Yeah, 95
Yep.
Theses.
Nailed to the cathedral door in Wittenberg. Yep.
And it was sort of the start of, other than the Orthodox Church, it was sort of the start of breaking away from Catholicism.
Yeah, yes, you're right. Yeah, so that you've got these new Protestant churches. They're referred to as Protestant, right? Because they are breaking away from the kind of monopoly that the Catholic Church had on Christian religion in Western Europe, right? So yeah, and they are often based on like very different and sometimes not always more democratic principles. Now the other thing that is helping us, like in the invention of the printing press, right? And so what is the printing press? You're like, what would this have to do with a movement that is about kind of intellectual awakening? What can you do with a printing press that you couldn't do before?
Mass production.
Yeah. You can spread ideas around much more quickly, right? The printing press allowed for ideas that might have otherwise been suppressed to make their way quickly out into at least the literate population, right? And one thing that also happens with the invention of the printing press is that literacy rates start going up as well. Slowly at first, and then a lot faster in the 18th century. Right? Once you've got more text out there, more people are able to read. So the basic beliefs underpinning the Enlightenment are, first, this faith in reason as the primary human attribute. Right? The thing that makes us human is the fact that we can reason. But congratulations, you can do a syllogism. You're not a baboon, right? Good for you. Well done. It tends to be anti-superstition. And the definition we get of superstition in the Enlightenment is pretty specific, right? When we talk about superstition, basically what an Enlightenment philosopher means is anything that doesn't have an observable cause and effects relationship, right? Or any attempt to explain something by means of something other than a cause and effect relationship, right? So, if you observe an effect and instead of trying to reason back to its cause, you say God did it. That would be superstition for them, right? Or belief in ghosts, or devils, or angels, or supernatural beings of any kind, right? Fairies and gnomes and things like that, right? This all falls under superstition. So the universe that an Enlightenment philosopher believes in operates according to observable scientific principles. Right? It's not coincidental, I think, that a lot of early Enlightenment philosophers are also mathematicians. Right? Isaac Newton's work on physics and on measuring the orbits of planets and things like that is a big influence on the way people see the universe at this point. Or at least a small subset of highly educated people, right? This doesn't necessarily filter down very quickly to the masses. Enlightenment thinkers also tend to be pro-free expression. Right? You should be allowed to express your beliefs in any way you want to, whatever those beliefs happen to be, even if Enlightenment philosophers think those beliefs are stupid. And they tend to favor progress and change over tradition. And the general take that you get on the Enlightenment traditionally in, say, like European history classes is that this is a good thing and this is humanity kind of growing up out of a kind of period of intellectual immaturity and superstition, right? A lot of people now kind of push back against that kind of simplistic narrative. And one of the things we see with Voltaire is that there's debate and dissension even amongst various kinds of advanced thinkers, right, in this movement. But the other thing that I want to make sure I tell you a little bit about here is what French society looked like at the time Voltaire was writing. So, do either of you know like who ruled France? Not specifically, but more kind of generally. Who ruled France before the French Revolution in the 1790, around 1790? Yeah, I mean, you've got kind of through the period we're talking about, you've got the 14th, the 15th, and then the 16th, right? So you got 3 Louis in rapid succession there, right? From a long, long line of Louis. But yeah, so it's a monarchy. And it is what we call an absolutist monarchy. We'll get into this in a little more detail when we talk about Rousseau, but suffice to say for now that an absolutist monarchy is one in which the buck stops with the king, right? The king has final say on all decisions, and kind of like makes his own needs and desires those of the nation, right? So absolutist kings usually ruled with a pretty tight grip on everything. So Louis XIV is the first the first king to openly espouse this philosophy in France at the end of the 17th century. Now the thing about Louis XIV is that he is, at the very least, a person of great intelligence, energy, talent, and charisma. His grandson, Louis XV, and his great-grandson, Louis XVI, not so much, right? So, we see some of the problems with hereditary monarchy there, right? You've got no guarantee that the next guy is going to be as skilled a ruler as the last guy, right? But beneath the king were what were referred to as the 3 estates. Right, so French society is divided up into these three segments. The first estate, those who pray. So, who do you think that would single? Who would be the members of the first estate? Those who pray. Yeah, exactly. First estate is the clergy. Good. The second estate, this one might be a little trickier. Those who fight. Who would that be?
That's the nobility, wasn't it?
Exactly, because nobility, right, aristocracies originally had a military purpose, right? The reason you made someone a knight and gave him a grant of land was so that you could earn enough money for armor and weapons and a horse and to raise a peasant militia when you needed to fight a war, right? So yeah, so those who fight are the nobility. And the third estate, those who work, would be who? Basically, who's left?
The peasants.
Yeah, well, and not even just the peasants, right? Peasants, you know, the urban middle classes, skilled laborers, right? Basically, the third estate is everybody else. The third estate vastly outnumbers the first and second estates. However, the first and second estates have a lot more power and influence and are exempt from most taxes. So we have a country that's run by a very small elite. And part of that elite is the Catholic Church, right? So does it look like France in the 18th century is very much in line with these Enlightenment principles?
No.
Especially if we take into account that there was a lot of government censorship as well, right? So, you know, you have printing presses, you have printing operations in France, but people are frequently arrested for publishing things the government doesn't like. So, for example, an acquaintance of Voltaire's, a guy by the name of Denis Diderot. Have either of you ever heard of Diderot before? Do you know what he did? Or what he's best known for? So Diderot was the publisher of one of the first modern encyclopedias. But the idea of democratizing knowledge in the way that Diderot did, kind of like making things that had been knowledgeable, that had been making information available that had once been available only to people who were initiated into particular crafts, or had studied at a university, or were members of the church, or high-ranking clergy, right? Distributing this kind of information was seen as a threat to the established order. And so Diderot was, he continued publishing new editions and new volumes of encyclopedia, but he was also arrested several times for doing so. So this is the climate in which Voltaire is writing this short novel, right? One in which you've got this emerging movement that is really interested in new ideas and progress and human freedom and free speech. And this kind of holdover medieval government in which a very small number of people have a great deal of power and a great deal of influence, not just over people's lives and work, but also kind of what they can say and what they can openly profess to believe, right? So the other major context for this is also a philosophical one, and this novella is part of a philosophical debate that Voltaire is inserting himself into. So, all of this stuff about sufficient and universal reason and cause and effect and a priori reasoning is a shot at one person and his followers. So the gentleman whose image is about to appear on the screen here, when it warms up, is one Gottfried Wilhelm von Leibniz, born 1646, died 1760. So he dies several years before Voltaire even puts pen to paper here, right? I want you to see this picture partly because I just want you to note the guy's fabulous wig. Does everybody, do you both know, by the way, why wealthy people in the 18th century shaved their heads and wore wigs? Men and women both.
I forgot. I watched a documentary why they did. I forgot. Oh. I knew it was common though.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like almost everybody did it.
Yeah, or at least rich people did it. Yes, it was to avoid lice.
Yeah.
Yeah, because lice were everywhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you shaved your head and wore a wig, so you didn't get lice. So Leibniz was a big deal mathematician. He invented calculus, and while it would be an exaggeration to say he is the inventor of the computer, without his work in mathematics, modern computers would not exist, right? So, hugely important figure in the history of ideas. But some of his ideas were arguably loony, right? Even people who are very, very intelligent, well, they don't always hit the nail on the head, right? So, in 1710, Leibniz published a book called the Theodicy. A theodicy, this is not a term, by the way, that Leibniz invented. There have been theodicies kind of stretching back centuries. So it's a tradition in philosophical reasoning. And Colby, you're nodding. Are you familiar with this idea? You're just showing that you're following along. Okay. So a theodicy is an attempt to explain why, if God is all-powerful, all-good, and just, evil still exists in the world, right? Why do bad things continue to happen, especially to people who don't deserve them? And yeah, this is a problem that philosophers in a variety of religious traditions have grappled with for centuries. So Leibniz's answer is that if it were possible for God to have created a better world, he would have done so. Therefore, we must live in the best of all possible worlds. Can you see anything problematic with that idea?
Because it sort of downplays suffering.
Okay. And most theodicies do. But I mean, like, if your concept of God is that God is all-powerful, right? Then shouldn't it be theoretically possible for God to do anything? So then why wouldn't it have been possible, if God is all-powerful, for God to create a world without evil? And then, if God is all-powerful and could have created a world without evil, can a God who created a world that has evil in it be considered all good? And, you know, I'm not asking you to come up with an answer here, right? But this is the, you know, the reason, you know, I ask these questions is because this is the thorny problem, right, that these philosophers were trying to resolve. And Leibniz's best of all possible worlds solution sounded to Voltaire like the biggest load of horse shit he had ever heard, right? It's like, this is ridiculous. And yeah, and I think it does, like, it downplays the idea that people actually suffer, right? And that suffering happens to people who don't deserve it. And so the mouthpiece for Leibniz's ideas in the novella is, like, can you figure out who this is just from your own reading? Which character is supposed to be Leibniz? Do we have a philosopher character who spouts a lot of bullshit about cause and effect? Pangloss, yeah. And what we should think of Pangloss and his philosophy is encoded right in his name, right? So loosely translated from Greek, the name Pangloss means all talk. So right in the naming of the character, we're being told that we should regard Professor Pangloss as being full of shit. Right, so if we look at the beginning here of chapter 1, right, we're introduced to Pangloss. Right. Pangloss was a professor of metaphysico-theologico-cosmolunagology. Right, so a nonsense field of philosophy is invented that combines metaphysics and theology with loony, right? He proved admirably that there is no effect without a cause, and that in this best of all possible worlds, the Baron's castle was the most magnificent of castles, and his lady the best of all possible baronesses. It is demonstrable, said he, that things cannot be otherwise than they are. For all being created for an end, all is necessarily for the best end. Observe that the nose has been formed to bear spectacles. Thus we have spectacles. Legs are visibly designed for stockings, and we have stockings. Stones were made to be hewn and to construct castles. Therefore my lord has a magnificent castle. For the greatest baron in the province ought to be the best lodged. Pigs were made to be eaten. Therefore we eat pork all the year round. Consequently, they who assert that all is well have said a foolish thing. They should have said all is for the best. So, if you're someone who believes in progress, right? What's the problem with the philosophy that states everything is already for the best? And that, as Pangloss puts it here, things cannot be otherwise than as they are. If things cannot be otherwise than as they are, does anything you do actually matter?
Can you repeat that one more time? I'm sorry.
Okay, sure. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and you just take your time with it, right? But yeah, it's better to come up with a slow, good answer than to try to answer too quickly, right? So if things cannot be otherwise than as they are, right? So if the only way things can be is the way they are,
right, or perceived.
yeah. Does anything you do make any kind of difference?
At that point, no. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, at that point.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's what we call a fatalist philosophy, right? That, everything, things can only be this way. So any attempt to change anything is at least pointless, right? But Pangloss argues that any attempt to change anything is actually bad, right? Because everything is not just as it has to be, right? Everything is organized in the best possible way for human happiness. Now, how might somebody like Pangloss have come to an idea like this? What's Pangloss's life like at the beginning of the novel here?
Very cushy.
Yeah.
He's been hired by the royal family.
Yeah, he is, he's patronized by the Baron. So, of course, it's in his best interest to stay in the Baron's good graces, right? By saying, everything in Westphalia is fantastic, right? Everything's great here. Please don't execute me or exile me. Yeah, so it's direct. Yeah, it's in his best interest to try to keep the patron happy. But also, he's got it pretty easy here. He doesn't have to do very much. Just praise the Baron, teach his children, and he's even got a pretty maidservant he can fool around with on the side, right? So yeah, pretty cushy situation. But even after he leaves this he's forced to leave this cushy situation, right? Does this change his view of the world at all? When Candide meets Pangloss again after being kicked out of Westphalia for kissing Mistress Cunegonde, what's happened to Pangloss since? What kind of condition is he in?
Syphilis.
He's got syphilis, yes. Yeah, and it doesn't come out and say he's got syphilis, but that's what the description is, meant to lead you to believe, right? So he's, this horrid beggar that he runs into in chapter 4. It says it on page 8 in this edition, right? At this discourse, Candide fainted again, but coming to himself, and having said all that it became him to say, inquired into the cause and effect, as well as into the sufficient reason that had reduced Pangloss to so miserable a plight. Alas, said the other, it was love, love, the comfort of the human species, the preserver of the universe, the soul of all sensible beings, love, tender love. Alas, said Candide, I know this love, that sovereign of hearts, that soul of our souls. Yet it never cost me more than a kiss and 20 kicks on the backside. How could this beautiful cause produce in you an effect so abominable? Pangloss made an answer in these terms. Oh, my dear Candide, you remember Paquette, that pretty wench who waited on our noble Baroness. In her arms I tasted the delights of paradise, which produced in me those hell torments with which you see me devoured. She was infected with them, she is perhaps dead of them. This present Paquette received of a learned grey friar, who had traced it to its source. He had had it of an old countess, who had received it from a cavalry captain, who owed it to a marchioness, who took it from a page, who had received it from a Jesuit, who when a novice had it in direct line from one of the companions of Christopher Columbus. For my part, I shall give it to nobody, I am dying. Oh, Pangloss, cried Candide, what a strange genealogy. Is not the devil the original stock of it? Not at all, replied this great man. It was a thing unavoidable, a necessary ingredient in the best of worlds. For if Columbus had not in an island of America caught this disease, which contaminates the source of life, frequently even hinders generation, and which is evidently opposed to the great end of nature, we should have neither chocolate nor cochineal. So, if Columbus's sailors hadn't brought syphilis to Europe from the New World, we wouldn't have chocolate and we wouldn't have fancy blue dye, right? So, does Pangloss seem to think that the benefits of introducing syphilis to Europe outweigh the costs? Yeah, and I mean, like, you know, there's a reason that Voltaire draws this out so long, right? That this long list of people who are suffering, right? This long description of what this disease does to the body, and then, oh, but if we didn't have this, we wouldn't have chocolate, right? It's meant to produce that kind of little smirk, right? Yeah. Because Pangloss's reasoning is supposed to be absurd. Right? He's dying, his body is physically rotting as Candide is standing before him. And he still says that this is all to the good. Now, to give us another example of how Pangloss's reasoning can even like lead to cruelty to other people. On page 10, right? This poor, this poor fellow, James the Anabaptist, who took Candide in and taught him a trade, who paid for Pangloss's cure, falls into the Bay of Lisbon off of a ship, right? Candide is about to jump after him, but was prevented by the philosopher Pangloss, who demonstrated to him that the Bay of Lisbon had been made on purpose for the Anabaptist to be drowned. Right? Everything has to have a cause and effect, right? So, the existence of the Bay of Lisbon, right, is reasonable cause for the effect of the drowning of this poor guy who has been nothing but nice to anyone, right? In fact, he's even fallen into the water because he was trying to save a sailor who then just let him fall in and didn't try to help him, right? So, Pangloss's view of the world, right, his whole philosophy, does it even seem to really be about exploring what cause and effect mean? What is he mostly trying to do? If he's not honestly inquiring into what causes this effect, what is he trying to prove, or maybe just trying to justify? Think about this in terms of the first thing he says when we meet him in the novella, right? That things cannot be otherwise than as they are.
I guess everything happens for a reason.
Right, that everything happens for a reason, right? But he doesn't even seem to be honestly inquiring into these reasons, right? He just makes up a reason when something happens. So maybe the more important belief is that things can only be the way they are, right? And what he's trying to do most of the time is just justify the status quo. Right? That this state of affairs, the way things are already set up, is the only way things can be. So why fight it? And to try to pick this up a little bit more next time. We're kind of running out of time. I'm going to give you the reading questions in a second. But I also want you to try to think about ways in which, even though Voltaire clearly thinks Pangloss is wrong, maybe look for a moment in which it treats him sympathetically too, right? Okay, let me give you the reading questions for next time, and then I will let you all go. And don't forget to turn in your free writes as you leave. Got here the questions and alignments. Great.